Hi there, it's Lynda again from Hoop Sisters, and this afternoon we are going to work on our mug rug. And our mug rug is part of the pincushion embroidery design from Hoop Sisters. This morning I went ahead and did both the Dresden plate pincushion and the matching wrist pincushion. And this little mug rug is adorable for me time. So let's get started. I'll show you how to stitch this design in no time. Let's talk about the supplies we need for our mug rug. The mug rug actually comes in two sizes, the large and the small. The large is 6 1/4 by 8 3/4. The small is 5.3 by 7.02. We are going to work on the large today. So on page 3, we will always find our supply list. So we will need, of course, some battleizer, which I have in the hoop. We just need one hooping of it. We will need background fabric. Their sizes are in your instructions. And we'll need backing fabric. This time I chose to have the same color. We will need 6 assorted fabrics for your Dresden plate fan blade. So I went through my scraps of red, and I have 6 assorted scraps of red fabric. We will need a center. So we need a little square for the center. For your threads, you will need some red embroidery thread to match your Dresden blades. You'll need some embroidery thread to match your center. You will need a background quilting thread. I'm going to use a gray. You will also need a neutral thread. And of course, you'll need a water-soluble thread. So let's get to the machine and get stitching. So step 1 is to put water-soluble thread in your needle. I'm going to use a red today so that you can see it, and we're going to stitch a placement stitch. Step 2 is to take your background fabric and center it over your placement stitch. You will continue with the water-soluble thread. I'm going to continue with the red so it's visible, and we tack this down. Step 3, I changed to the dark gray quilting thread, and we will stitch the background quilting. Step 4 will be to change back to water-soluble thread. Again, I'm going to use red, and we're going to stitch a placement stitch in this area right here for our little half Dresden. Step 5, we're going to continue with our water-soluble thread. I'm going to keep with my red thread. We're going to place our first little Dresden blade. So I have them all laid out down here in the order I want to stitch them in. And it's going to go right here. So I want to make sure it extends past the bottom of the stitching line and over this area here, extends over that. So it covers everything. So I will place it, and then I will tack it down. Time to trim it. This area right here, we're going to leave a small seam allowance of about 1/8 of an inch. This area right here as well, because that'll be covered up by the center applique. This area here we're going to not touch because it'll be within the seam. The curved area needs to be trimmed really close because that will get a satin stitch later on. So there it is, all trimmed. Our next step is to take our next fabric for our Dresden blade, put it right side down to the last one, making sure that our raw edges are even and that when we flip it up after it's stitched, that it covers everything it needs to cover. So this looks good. So I will put this back onto the machine and stitch it. After the seam is stitched, I will flip the fabric right side up, smooth it out, and let it tack it down. So I will trim this one the same way I did the last one. I'll trim leaving a small seam allowance here at the bottom. I'll leave a seam allowance on the side. And then the very top curved edge, I will trim close. So we will continue those exact same steps for the rest of the blades. So here's the last Dresden blade, all stitched on, trimmed, close on this edge, and I left some within my seam allowance. So the next step is to add my red embroidery thread, or whatever color your Dresden is, and it'll do some decorative stitching in between the fan blades. Our next step is a placement stitch for the Dresden center. And I'm using black thread because my Dresden center will be black fabric. Then we will take the black fabric, or whatever color your Dresden center is, place it over the placement stitch and let it tack down. Then I will trim it and satin stitch it. My next step is to go ahead and put my red embroidery thread in because it matches my Dresden blades, and stitch the satin stitch along the raw edge of the blades. Almost there. For step 21, I'm going to place my black thread in my needle, and it's going to stitch the words "me time" right up here on my mug rug. Ready for our last step. So you can see I've got the entire front of my mug rug ready to go. I've trimmed up any threads that there might be. And the last step is to place the backing fabric right side down, centering it over the top, getting it nice and flat. And I will place a neutral thread in the needle. So I will probably use maybe a white or a fill thread in the needle, and it's going to stitch around the whole thing except for leaving an opening right here at the side for turning. We're completely done. I've taken it out of the hoop. You can see the triple stitching around the outside for strength, and we have an opening here. So now I'm going to trim it, and I am going to use the trimmer by George to completely remove the battleizer from the seam to get rid of the bulk. And I'll do that all the way around. And then I will turn the trimmer over and trim all the seam allowances, leaving just 1/4 of an inch. And the last step will be just to trim off these corners at an angle. So I very carefully take my little mini hoop scissors and I go inside and I very gently poke those corners out. Just help them out a little bit. And you can see my red stitching along here. That is what should be water-soluble thread, so it will not show up on yours. The beauty of water-soluble thread, you can just get a little damp, even a Q-tip, and it will come right out. So now I have all my corners poked out. I will take this to the ironing board and press in my opening, and I will come back and talk about how to finish this up. So here's my opening, all neatly pressed in, making sure it's nice and straight on the side. I am going to hand stitch that, but I do love to use a little bit of Roxanne's glue basted. It's a water-soluble quilt basting glue, and I'll just run a small bead. I'm pretty far away from the folded edge because I do not want my hand sewing needle to get involved with that glue. And I just place it, iron it dry with the iron, and then I don't have to worry about pins, and I can just hand sew this opening closed. I hope you enjoyed our video today. If you need to purchase our pincushion USB, you can go ahead and go to our website or go visit your local quilt shop. They would be happy to sell you one. Hope you enjoy your little mug rug, and we will talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.